This is a presentation on the origins of the F-86 Sabre, its deployment to Korea to counter the MiG-15 during the Korean War, and Canadian-built Sabres. Sabre origins. In the 1930s, the German aviation industry led the world in research and development of rocket and jet-powered aircraft. In 1939, Germany had flown the world's first jet-powered aircraft, the Heinkel He-178, which had a speed of 372 miles per hour. During World War II, in 1941, the prototype German Messerschmitt Me-262 made its maiden flight, and in 1943 it was ordered into production, and became the world's first jet fighter to enter operational service, with over 1,000 built. At a maximum speed of 560 miles per hour, the Me-262 was about 100 miles per hour faster than the best Allied fighter, the P-51 Mustang. One of the more noticeable features of the Me-262 are that its wings are swept back at an angle of 19 degrees, whereas the P-51 Mustang has a straight wing. The United States was also researching jet-powered aircraft during World War II, and in 1942, its first jet aircraft, the Bell XP-59A Aerocomet, made its maiden flight, but because it was underpowered, with a maximum speed of just 375 miles per hour, it did not enter service as a fighter. Instead, it was relegated to a role as a trainer. In 1945, the United States' first jet fighter to enter operational service was the Lockheed P-80A Shooting Star. However, it never saw combat during World War II. It had a maximum speed of 594 miles per hour. In late 1944, North American Aviation started to design a jet-powered aircraft that was based on their P-51 Mustang design. The aircraft, the XFJ-1 Fury, was designed for the U.S. Navy for carrier operations. The United States Army Air Force became interested in the program, and requested prototypes with the designation XP-86. The XP-86 differed from the XFJ-1 Fury in several ways, but the biggest difference was the lighter and slimmer fuselage, as it did not require the structural strength for carrier-based takeoffs and landings. As the XP-86 development continued in early 1945, it was discovered that the aircraft could not meet the United States Army Air Force speed requirement of 600 miles per hour, and there was a risk that the program could be cancelled. After the fall of Nazi Germany in May 1945, North American Aviation reviewed the captured research data relating to the Me-262 swept wing, and determined that the solution to meet the speed requirement was swept-back wings. A wind tunnel test of a scale model with swept-back wings at 35 degrees proved that the XP-86 could achieve speeds of over 600 miles per hour. In November of 1945, the United States Army Air Force authorized North American Aviation to proceed with the development of the swept-wing XP-86. The first of three prototypes, PU-597, was delivered in August of 1947 and made its maiden flight in October of that same year. In April 1948, PU-597 became the first jet aircraft to break the sound barrier, 6 months after Chuck Yeager became the first man to do it in the Bell X-1 rocket-propelled aircraft. In May of 1948, the first production F-86A left the factory. The F-86As had 650 caliber machine guns with 300 rounds per gun, and it could carry 16 5-inch rockets, or a 2,000-pound bomb load. The machine guns fired at 1,200 rounds per minute, with the rounds being armor-piercing incendiary. The Sabre had a radar-ranging gun sight that would calculate the lead position for the pilot to fire the guns. Inside the cockpit, on top of the instrument panel, the reflector glass displayed a dot within a circle that the pilot would use to maneuver his plane to get the enemy plane within that circle, and the dot on the tailpipe. The Sabre entered service with the United States Air Force in February of 1949, with the 94th Fighter Wing being the first wing to receive the F-86A Sabre. In June of 1950, Communist North Korea invaded the Republic of South Korea and the Korean War began. Initially, the U.S. Air Force dominated in the air, as it was easily able to destroy North Korea's antiquated air force, with the F-51 Mustang, F-80 Shooting Star, and the F-84 Republic Thunderjet. However, that changed in November of 1950, with the sudden appearance of Soviet-built MiG-15s, which were faster and more maneuverable than any of the U.S. Air Force fighters. The United States did not think that the Soviets were technologically advanced enough to produce such an aircraft. The MiG-15 was designed as a bomber interceptor to shoot down American B-29 bombers. With the introduction of the MiG, the U.S. Air Force had lost air superiority in Korea. The MiG could carry an assortment of armaments, including rockets and bombs. The more impressive armaments were the 37 and 23 mm cannons. In response to the MiG-15, the U.S. Air Force rushed 3 squadrons of F-86As to Korea. The F-86A Sabre had a slight edge in speed, however the MiG had a higher service ceiling, a faster rate of climb, and was more maneuverable. Improvements continued on the Sabre during the Korean War, and with the delivery of the F-86F, the Sabre had the edge over the MiG. The Royal Canadian Air Force did not have a fighter wing in the Korean War, however approximately 20 RCAF pilots and 60 Canadian-built F-86 Sabres served with the U.S. Air Force. RCAF pilots completed 914 combat sorties and accounted for 9 MiG kills. At the end of the Korean War, in July of 1953, it was reported that the number of MiGs claimed shot down was 792 versus 78 Sabres, a kill ratio of 10-1. This kill ratio has been disputed as newer reporting has the kill ratio at between 1.8-1 and 1.3-1. Canadian-built Sabres. In 1949, the Canadian government decided to re-equip the RCAF's frontline fighter squadrons with the Sabre, and signed a licensing agreement with North American Aviation that allowed Canada to build the F-86 Sabre. The plan was to initially assemble F-86 parts built in the United States, and then to eventually manufacture most of the parts in Canada, including Canadian-designed jet engines. The first Canadian-built Sabre was assembled from American-made parts. It was the only Sabre Mark I produced and was equivalent to an American F-86A. In August of 1950, the Sabre Mark I was ready for test flights. In that same month, Canadair chief test pilot, Alexander "Al" Lilly, became the first Canadian to break the sound barrier in the Sabre Mark I, and the Sabre the first aircraft to fly faster than the speed of sound over Canadian soil. Jacqueline Cochran, a prominent racing pilot, was a pioneer in women's aviation. In 1952, Cochran decided to challenge the world speed record for women, however the U.S. Air Force would not lend her an F-86 Sabre. She did however get permission from the Canadian Minister of Defence to borrow the sole Canadair Sabre Mark III, which was designed as a test bed for the Canadian-designed Orenda jet engine. She was also provided a Canadair ground crew for the flight. In May 1953, Jackie became the first woman to break the sound barrier at Rogers Dry Lake, California. Her friend Chuck Yeager flew by her side that day. The F-86 Sabre was flown by the RCAF's Golden Hawks aerobatic team from 1959 to 1964. From 1950 until 1958, Canada had built 1,815 Sabres in 6 variants, with the Mark V and 6 using the Orenda jet engine. Canada also supplied over 800 Sabres to other countries including Germany, England, Colombia, South Africa, and the United States. The RCAF retired the F-86 Sabre from fighter operations in 1963, but continued to use it in other roles until 1968. The Sabre was replaced by the CF-104 Starfighter.